Has anyone ever told you your best option is to quit? You just really don't have what it takes to pull this off. I'm a dean in Northwestern's engineering school, and my job is to work with students who find themselves in the middle of a crisis. But when I was a junior in college here at Northwestern, I was that student. The year was 1985, and I was studying industrial engineering. But just 1 year before that, I was an accounting major at a small liberal arts college in Michigan, realizing that I did not want to be an accountant. And so I went on to findanewmajor.com. Just kidding, right? I actually had to talk to a real live person, and that was Paul Nelson, one of my first mentors and most influential mentors. And he helped me find a path that led me to Northwestern. And I could not have been happier. I could not have been more thrilled to be here studying industrial engineering until I found myself flunking my first class as a transfer student. It was electricity and magnetism. And I can still picture the professor drawing the distribution curve on the board. And it looked like a giant rat. And I was the bow on the rat's tail. Okay? I knew it was serious, but I didn't know quite how serious until I was sitting in his office trying to ask for his advice, and he, swear to God, looked at my score and said, "Mr. Holtgreive, have you ever considered an easier major other than engineering?" His advice was quit. Run as fast as you can. So I found myself in what I would call a moment of intense uncertainty. MIU for short. Whoops. Anyone here ever experienced a moment of intense uncertainty? Maybe this morning on the way here? I think the ones in the front row, maybe? Okay. You know, the reality is I deserved to be flunking that class because I wasn't doing what I knew I needed to do to learn the material. But it wasn't because I didn't care or I was lazy. It was because it was really hard. And at that time, I felt like I was the only one who wasn't getting it, didn't know how to do it. And that made it really scary to ask for help. I mean, I'm new here. I mean, if I can't figure this out on my own, maybe I don't belong at Northwestern, right? But in that moment, when he suggested that I quit, something snapped inside of me. First thing I remember is I was really pissed off. He created a very powerful but unpredictable form of intention known as righteous indignation. That was me. You know, when I left his office, I was determined to pass that class. I wanted to show that he was wrong. And you know, I didn't know how, but I knew it was going to happen. And so what's important to know, though, is I hadn't lost the fear that I wasn't able to do the work, that I couldn't pull this thing off, but I wasn't focused on it anymore. My intention to prove him wrong had taken center stage. So I redoubled my efforts. I sought out every opportunity to seek help. I even changed my strategies, which up until that time, that was me, up until that time, were all I needed. And it worked. I aced the second midterm, and I got a B- in the class, and I passed. But don't get me wrong, this is not a story about never quit. I did drop chemistry, because sometimes your best option is to quit, okay? But if you're on a path that you believe in, and you encounter a challenge that seems to be blocking that path, you have options for responding. If you can control your fear, if you can manage your fear, you can leverage your intention to make a choice of whether it's the right time to head to an exit or whether it's worth taking a chance that you can meet that challenge even if failure is a possible outcome. And so now I have those conversations all the time. For the last 2.5 decades, I've been meeting with students in moments of intense uncertainty. And let me tell you, when a student comes into your office and they're feeling overwhelmed and they are kind of consumed by fear and doubt, there's nothing they love more than to have you explain to them what a wonderful opportunity this is to build resilience. right? So I've had to get creative about how I have these conversations. And that's why I spend a disproportionate amount of my time now talking about flashlights, because it's the best way I know to explain how our attention works. And when we're in a moment of intense uncertainty, our attention is our most valuable commodity. So imagine your attention is a flashlight. It creates a beam of light, and whatever is illuminated by that light represents your awareness. Where you direct that light represents your intention. So put it another way, our awareness is a product of our attention, and our attention is an expression of our intention. But for many of us, our intention is unintentional. So let me check with you. How many of you right now are really fully paying attention to what I'm saying? Okay, if you're not, don't feel bad. I'm not fully paying attention either. It feels like we're listening, but when we really tune into what's going on in our heads, we realize that we're constantly being flooded by thoughts, right, and stories. That last speaker was so awesome and inspiring. I'm not sure I'm buying this whole flashlight thing yet, right? Did I park in a tow zone today? Were they really tow me on Holy Saturday? Where are we going to go to dinner after this? Any one of these thoughts can carry our minds out of the present moment and onto an unintentional journey. Harvard researchers Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert actually discovered that the average adult spends as much as half of their waking hours in a mindless state called mind wandering. Even more disturbing was that same study revealed that much of that time is associated with unhappiness. And we now have the technology to understand why that's true. We can actually peer into the human brain in real time to see that when we're in those moments, the parts of our brain that are active are the ones associated with self-centered rumination and worry, right? Even when we are, particularly when we're in moments of intense uncertainty, it can feel like our flashlights are being jerked back and forth by deadlines and crises and failed expectations. It leaves us feeling ungrounded and exhausted much of the time, right? Anybody can relate to that? So what do? If we can realize that we're the ones holding our flashlight, with it, we have the ability to be intentional. We possess the power of intention. So how do you take advantage? How do you leverage that power of attention? It really requires accurately understanding what our intention is. Let's use the example of a moment of intense uncertainty. When you're in an MIU, it can feel like there's no difference between the intention to succeed and the intention to fail, not to fail, right? They can feel like the same thing. But if we use our flashlight analogy, if our intention is not to fail, where are we shining our light? On what failure looks like. What threatens our success? What are the consequences of failing now? And when we shine our light on those things, what do we create? We create an awareness of fear, rumination, threats. Those aren't wrong, but they're unproductive when we're trying to bring out our best performance. Focusing on our fear of failing creates an awareness of I am not. I'm not good enough. I'm not getting enough support. I'm not guilty. But if we can shift our attention to succeeding in the form of curiosity, excitement, and connection, we focus our light on opportunities for learning, seeking understanding, and finding authentic connection, which produces an awareness of I am. I am curious. I'm excited to learn new strategies. I'm committed to doing my best, regardless of what the outcome is. Sounds pretty simple, right? Just shine your lights on I am, and all's good. But we know it's not quite that easy. Let me ask you, how many of you look forward to moments of intense uncertainty? Show of hands. I didn't think there'd be no hands. Come on. That's okay. That's normal, right? But it does help explain why it's hard during those moments to find alternative paths that can possibly lead us to success. The only path usually in those moments we're looking for is the one that's going to get us the hell out of there as fast as possible, right? You know, in some ways, our brains are hardwired to take the nearest exit. But it's not all bad news. That same brain research reveals that we have the ability to rewire those patterns of thinking, those paths that take us in those unproductive ways, through intentional effort. So what do I mean by intentional effort? You know, it can be as simple as paying attention to where you're shining your light. By simply tuning in to what is present in the moment in the form of our physical sensations, the emotions that we're experiencing, or the stories that are running around inside of our head, cultivates a quality of attention known as mindfulness. And I can tell you from my work for the last 2.5 decades, I have found that mindfulness training is the most effective tool for helping us plug into our power of intention. Well, let me ask you this. Which of these two pictures best represents kind of how you feel on an average day? Do you feel mindful or mindful? Okay, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I know I oftentimes can fall into that mindful. You know, mindfulness, it almost feels like you can't pick up a newspaper or a magazine these days without seeing an article about it. But interestingly, this is not a new idea. This has been around for thousands of years as a core tenet of Buddhism. So why is it getting all this attention now? I think there's really two main reasons. First is that we have never needed it more. Our attention has never been under greater siege than it is right now in this moment. And there's, you know, when you look at the number of distractions, they only seem to be growing. And second, I think it's because we now have the science to show why it works. You know, I describe mindfulness as a quality of attention necessary for living in the moment. And why is that important? Because the present moment is the only opportunity that we get to show up for our lives. Right now. Now's another one. You know, you can actually think of your life as one long sequence of moments, right? And our intention for showing up, particularly in moments of intense uncertainty, determine the impact that we will make. When does mindfulness begin? Some would say it's got to begin with awareness, right? Because without awareness, there's no choice. There's no intentionality. We're just kind of following those pre-programmed scripts. But you and I know now that intention or awareness is really a product of our attention, right? So it's got to start with attention. Wait a minute, though. Attention is an expression of intention. So it's got to be intention. No, wait a minute. Attention without awareness is unintentional. This is getting complicated. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? Where does it begin? I believe that it begins when enough is enough. When we reach a point in our lives where we're ready to trade mindful for mindful. Okay, who's reaching for their phone? Anyone? Did I create a mini MIU, a mini mu? If you weren't reaching for your phone, but maybe thinking about it, it's not wrong, but it is impulsive, right? And it's a great example of how easily our minds can be triggered to go, suck down those well-worn paths. It's not wrong, but if we can realize that we are holding our flashlight, we can leverage our power of intention when it matters most to make a choice between whether or not it makes sense to head to the nearest exit or to illuminate a new path. Thank you for sharing your attention with me.